Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Redbird Rundown. I'm your host, Josh Jacobs, and I'm the site expert over at Redbird Rants. And I'm excited to have another episode with you guys. Today, we're going to be more of a Q&A style, as we had some people submit some questions over Twitter and some other platforms as well. So we'll be covering those different questions as we go. In case you missed it, last episode, we had Victor Scott II on, who's a center field prospect within the Cardinal system. If you look at recently updated prospect lists around the league, you'll see he's a top 5 prospect now within the Cardinal system. And he's on pace to steal over 100 bases for the Cardinals this year. He's an 80 grade defender, 80 grade runner. He's improving a ton at the plate. So go catch that interview if you missed it. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the things. So don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to this at, comment, like it. It helps the podcast out a ton. Let me know if there's any questions or things you want covered in future episodes. We'll look to do that as well. And we are on YouTube now. So if you're watching on here, hello, you can see me. How's it going? This will be great for interviews and stuff in the future. But if you like to listen, then obviously this will always be on Spotify or Apple, other platforms coming as well. But so I want to dive into some questions today. They kind of vary between some different in-game things that have happened recently, some current roster decisions that are happening. I've got some interesting tidbits to share about the Wainwright situation. And then there's also some questions about the offseason. So it's a varying episode. There's a lot of different topics to talk about. I'm excited to jump in. And so one thing to preface off the top, I'm someone two issues. Well, I have a lot of issues, but here's 2 issues I'm going to share with you. First, I'm terrible at pronunciating names. So if I see a name on here and I say it wrong, I am so sorry. And you can hold it against me if you want. I apologize. Please tweet at me, give me the how you'd pronounce it. If I said it wrong, let me know. I'd like to get better at it. But then second, I can't promise I'll get better at it, because if I say a name wrong the first time, it sticks in my head. So you may even notice that with some of these on here. So please let me know if I'm saying it wrong, but I appreciate all the questions that came in. We'll dive in. So the first thing on Twitter, Creighton Teramis. Okay, let's see if I got that right. He asked about why Gio's game the other night was recorded as a blown save when he came in during the 7th inning. And then he assumed that you can only get a blown save if it was the 9th inning or maybe the 8th inning. So there's actually a couple interesting things with the Gio situation, because you'll also see that, well, first let's get the blown save. If you come in the 7th inning with 3 or less runs of a lead, you can get a save. You have to go all 3 innings, but if you pitch the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings, you can record the save. If you give up the lead in the 7th inning and you have 3, 2, or 1 less runs, you can get a blown save accredited to you as well. So that's kind of where it came in. It's really odd. It's not uncommon, but you don't see 7th inning blown saves all that often. So that's kind of weird one. But what you don't see that often, which is kind of weird, is that so he blew the save, and then the Cardinals came back and regained the lead while he was still the pitcher. So even though he didn't pitch another inning, he was still technically he should have been awarded the win at that point, but it wasn't given to him in that game. And it's because the scorekeeper can designate an appearance as brief and ineffective and not award the win to them. So even though traditionally Gallego should have gotten the win for that game, so he did get the blown save, but he should have gotten a win as well on his birthday. Instead, he was credited the blown save, and then the win was not given to him either because it was designated as a brief and ineffective appearance. So it's a really weird thing. You can go read about it under like the win glossary on MLB.com and explain more about it. And if you're nerding out about this like me, another interesting thing that you'll see this year, and that's, I believe, is the same game. Yeah, it was the same game. Jordan Walker hit the triple, quote unquote, the go-ahead triple. That was really an error on the right fielder, but they credited a triple. And I've been looking at, and it seems like, so you'll see on broadcast, if you've listened to Bally Sports over the year, or even national broadcasts, people have been pointing out there's some weird like error calls this year, or non-error calls this year, where things are being called hits when really they should be called errors. And it's been noticed not just by broadcasts and fans, but by coaches and players as well, where they're like, why are these things not being called errors? And so first, it's a credit to the scorekeeper has a lot of power to say something's an error versus a hit. And again, a triple even though it's one time. It doesn't matter for the stat book for Walker. So good for him. He got the triple. Really should have been an air. But so it's something that you've been seeing a lot. And then I've also heard that there's some theories that the pitch clock may be part of the reason that these errors are not being called as often by scorekeepers, because they have so little time to kind of think through, okay, should I call it air, should or not? And so some of them are just erring on the side of, okay, it was a hit, because they have to move on to the next thing. So weird stuff like that. Some of you are probably like, I don't care, but those are some info there. And so let's move on to the next thing. Russ Robinson, better known as Uncle Frank on Twitter. You can catch some of his writing over on Redbird Rants. He's awesome. He asked, with Matt's out for the rest of the season, does that reassure Wainwright's spot in the rotation for the rest of the year? I think that's a great question, and we'll actually build upon his question with the next person here. No. Does it increase his chances? I think yes. But it really does seem like a lot of this is going to hinge upon how his start goes Thursday. Ollie Marmal's talked about this already. They're going to reevaluate his spot in the rotation. Sorry, I hit my mic if you could hear that. After his start Thursday. And I imagine, like, even if it doesn't go well, as long as it goes better than it has lately, and it's still like 5 runs he's given up at most, I think he'll stay in the rotation. I don't think they're going to pull him if he's just, I don't think anyone's expecting him to be really good, right? If he's not great, he's not good, he's just bad, but he's not really, he's been historically bad. I think I'm pretty sure he's the 3rd worst ERA among the starters who have 15 or more starts in a season. Like, it's bad. If he pitches like that again Thursday, then you'll have a real conversation, and not just a conversation. Like, I think you could actually see Wainwright pulled from the rotation. Does that mean going to the bullpen? I don't know. I would probably guess it would mean an IL stint to see if he can get right again one more time, and maybe he gets one more start later in the year. I would like to see if they pull him, move him to the bullpen, see if you can get him some like cheap wins in there. But what I've heard, so Eric Trident and I from Fansided kind of had Eric Trident covers the Blue Jays, and Casey Lawrence, who you see was called up recently, was a Blue Jay, and so he's just got some information there, and him and I were able to check on some things, and it sounds like Casey Lawrence would be the next man up in the Cardinals rotation if they pull Wainwright after his start on Thursday. So that's a name to watch. I don't think Matz's injury really impacts it all that much. I do think it helps a little bit with Wainwright's case of staying, because I think they would have been really eager to see what Thompson can do. But now that he's already in the rotation, probably a little bit more patient. But again, if he just blows up, I just think there's a good chance he's not in the rotation anymore, which is really sad. And I hate seeing the hate on Twitter toward Wainwright, because he is one of the greatest guys you can ask for in baseball. A great representative of the game. He's a great Cardinal, and so it's hard to watch, and his play. He wouldn't say it's acceptable either, but I don't know if it's also, I wouldn't agree with the way people are talking about him. So building upon this, again, please, I am so bad name, so please tell me if I am butchering this at all. But Josie Anderson on Twitter asked another Matt's related question. With Matt's injury, do we see Graceffo or any other minor leaguers get a shot? And that's interesting. I think at some point, yes. The question of when and who is probably what everyone wants to know. So it's the current rotation: Miles Michaelis, Adam Wainwright, Dakota Hudson, Matthew Liberatore, and Zach Thompson. Wow. I don't know if any of us were expecting that to be the rotation at this point in the year, but that's where we're at. Outside of Casey Lawrence, I would say Drew Rom makes the most sense as like the next man up. First, he's on the 40-man roster already, so that helps them not have to add anyone to the 40-man roster. I'll say a couple of things about 40-man roster real quick while we're on the topic. Because I see both sides of the argument, where I think it's like, obviously there are players on the 40-man roster right now where you could easily pinpoint, like a Taylor Motter, even a Jose Fermin to an extent, and there's a Kyle Leahy. There's just some names on there where I'm like, I don't really know if it's worth holding on to those 40-man roster spots. But that's if you're looking at just this season. if you're looking at 2024, if you're the Cardinals and you said, let's take Gordon Graceffo, for example, if you think there's very little chance, and I mean very little chance, like it is like a lot of things that have to go wrong for Graceffo to be on the opening day roster next year, then it's probably not in your best interest to add him to the 40-man. Because what that means is over the offseason, if you add him to the 40-man roster now, he's on it. And if you ever have, like if they really want to add a lot of outside arms this offseason, they want to have as many 40-man roster spots as possible open. So you can add those 3 starters, make some Rule 5 picks. You could sign some flyer relievers, all that kind of stuff. You want as many 40-man roster spots open as possible that you could fill and not have to use it on prospects that you see a future in, but you're just not quite sure when. So I think that's kind of going through their head a little bit. Now, do I totally agree with it? No. Like, I think you could at least give one of the guys a shot outside of Rom, like a McGreevy or Graceffo. But I think that's, again, playing into a little bit why we're not seeing guys. I don't think that's going to affect Mason Wynn. Like, he should be up here because they plan for him being on the roster next year. But some of these young guys, like a Nick Dunn or Graceffo or a McGreevy, if they're not already in the 40-man roster and the Cardinals don't really see a path toward them being an impact player at the beginning of 2024, unless they really think they need to see what they have in them at the big league level, I just don't see it because, like, think of the hierarchy. If they're going after 3 starters, they already have 5 rotation spots filled. And then they already kind of have their bullpen options internally. Those young arms aren't probably going to be early factors in it. And if they play their way into it in spring training, then they can get added to the 40-man. But obviously, the Cardinals want to see McGreevy and Graceffo and guys like that be starters. So they're not going to shoehorn them into a bullpen role, hopefully. So you already have 5 starters. Then you also have Matthew Liberatore, right? And then you also have Dakota Hudson, and you also have Zach Thompson. So you already have 5, assuming they sign and trade for their 3 starters. You already have your starting 5, plus you already have 3 depth options on the 40-man roster. It doesn't make a ton of sense it makes sense, but I also see the reasoning why not to force some young guys onto the 40-man. Again, unless you think there's a realistic chance they can impact early 2024. So, again, I would love to see McGreevy and Graceffo. It's a lot more fun than watching Casey Lawrence if he gets a start in here. But I see the Cardinals' reasoning because, again, if they're really going to overhaul the pitching of this 40-man roster, they're going to want a lot of spots available to do that. So, Josie, I'm going on with this. So long story short, I don't know if we're going to see them. I think Drew Rom we will see at some point. I don't think Casey Lawrence would stay in the rotation the whole time, but I think that's more of like a, hey, let's figure things out for a week or two. But Drew Rom in his last 2 starts, his first 2 starts in Memphis, went 5 innings, 10 Ks, gave up only 1 hit, which was a home run and 2 walks in his first appearance. And his second appearance, he went 6 innings, only gave up 1 hit again, 2 walks, 8 strikeouts. So Drew Rom's looked great so far. I could see him getting some starts down the stretch. And then Gordon Graceffo, I don't really see. He told Daniel Guerrero recently, or I think as of today, actually, that he doesn't feel like himself yet. He's pitched 39 innings since his return from injury, and he's still kind of feeling things out. So unless things get situated quick, I think he's probably out of the question. The other 2 names to watch would be Michael McGreevy, which I don't think they're very intrigued by that yet. If they were, I think we would have already seen him. I think they are a little bit worried about what he's going to be right now and that he might need some more seasoning. But maybe he's like a Liberatore where he needs to get beat up a little bit at the major league level to make some improvements. So McGreevy is someone to watch. And then Adam Kloffenstein, I think, is another name you could see. But realistically, I think Drew Rom's probably the easiest guy to look at, and then potentially Michael McGreevy from there. But yeah, so great questions so far. I appreciate that, Josie and Russ. And let's keep going. So that's mainly the roster questions that we've got for the current roster, but then we have some offseason questions that I want to be addressed. So I'll start with the fun one that for sure isn't happening, but if you know Andrew Wang from the Newt News podcast, which I was just on their last episode, it was a fun time. So go catch that conversation with Andrew and Sandy. Sandy's a new writer with Redbird Rants. He's been doing a great job. So shout out to Sandy. But Andrew, he loves himself some Lars Nootbaar, hence New News podcast, and he loves himself some Shohei Ohtani. So he always has to ask, which 2-way player should the Cardinals target in the 2023 offseason? Andrew, I love it, man. I wish Shohei would come to St. Louis. Not happening though. Not even worth really going into that any further. But if you want some Shohei Ohtani talk, right now I've seen some interesting tea leaves that the Mariners could be the front runner now, which I'll get into in a second. And then I would say the Dodgers. So those are the two teams I'd look at. Heard the Cubs. I don't see it. Mets. I don't see it. I honestly could potentially see a return to Anaheim. I'm not like, I don't think it's out of the question, but if I had to bet, it's the Dodgers or Mariners. But it sounds like the Mariners might be the front runner, which I do think could be a really interesting thing for the Cardinals. If Ohtani, first of all, get him out of the, don't go to the National League, Ohtani. Stay away. Go to the Mariners. Do that. Or stay at the Angels. Do whatever. But do not go to the National League. Do not go to the Dodgers. Definitely don't go to the Cubs. But if he were to go to Seattle, I think that's probably the only way we see the Mariners really realistically think about parting with one of their illegitimate starting pitchers. They're not trading Luis Castillo and they're not trading George Kirby. Those are two off the table. And it really sounds like Logan Gilbert to them is also off the table right now. So unless they add a guy like Shohei, I don't really see them trading Logan Gilbert like what many of us thought could happen before. I also think Bryce Miller and Brian Wu are probably off the table as well. But if they make a move like that, I do think it makes it possible because they're all in. And you got Ohtani as another starter, and they still need more offense. If you are add Ohtani, that's a huge win for their offense, but they still need more. Then I could see them potentially partying with Gilbert, Wu, Miller, or I could, interestingly, especially if they're adding an Ohtani contract, I could see them trying to get rid of Robbie Ray and maybe eating a little bit of that money. And so that could be a buy low guy for St. Louis, a guy who has legit strikeout stuff, won Cy Young a few years ago. If they could get him on a little bit of a discounted deal where the Mariners eat some money. So really interesting guy to look at. So keep an eye out on that. Ohtani to the Mariners could play into the Cardinals' favor, but so there's that. A couple more. We have some more detailed questions that come through as well, and I think they're really interesting. So another one of our awesome Redbird Rants crew, Dan Campbell here. He asked, what is a good and fair contract return offer to sign Jordan Montgomery in free agency? Would something like the Chris Bassett deal or the Taijuan Walker deal get it done? That is a great question. And I am fascinated. I'm honestly more intrigued to figure out what the numbers are on the Jordan Montgomery, Jack Flaherty, Sonny Gray market than I am like the Aaron Nola, Julio Urias, Blake Snell market. Because I think those guys you kind of already know are 25 to 30 million, depending on the guys, between 4 and 6 years. These guys, I'm not really sure. I think a lot of it's going to play into what the free agent market develops, right? And I think we've seen this year teams need pitching. And Jim Bowden, I believe it was, came out the other day, or maybe it was oh no, I think it was Buster Only, said that agents around the league are a little bit worried. They're representing players that the pitching market might actually take a dip this year, and that teams aren't going to hand out big contracts because of how bad it went this past offseason with a lot of big deals not working out. I could see that happening, but I also kind of think that's just like teams trying to get the market to go down because people want to mitigate as much risk as possible. We'll see though. If I had to bet, I bet so. Let's look at those deals. Chris Bassett got 3 years, 63 million. So that's up 21 million AAV. Taijuan Walker got 4 years, 72 million, and an 18 million AAV. If I had to bet, I would say Montgomery gets at least, so he gets more years than Bassett because Bassett was in the mid 30s. Montgomery is going to be 31 in December. I would say Montgomery would get at least 4 years, but he could get as low as 3, but I would say probably 4 to 5 years on a deal. And then I would say he would range between, at the lowest in my head would be 18 million, but I think more 21, 22 million dollars a year makes sense. So I would say something in the ballpark of 4 years, 84 million, which is pretty similar to Walker, or is basically the Bassett deal over 4 years, or like a 5 for 100 or 5 for 110 type thing. I think that's what we're looking at for Montgomery. Again, it's just the pitching market. You got to pay up for stuff. Like guys that are true aces go 25, 30, 35 million, sometimes 40 million a year. So when you're trying to get like a number 3 starter who can kind of pitch up to a number 2 sometimes, you're looking at, again, 20 million is probably the minimum right now. And so it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the market. So he's 31 in September, or in December. He's got a 3.48 ERA last season and a 3.30 this season. He strikes out about 8 batters per 9 innings, so he's not a strikeout pitcher, but he has strikeout stuff. He gets you innings, and big thing, no comp pick attached to him. So any team trying to sign Jordan Montgomery, unlike Sonny Gray or Blake Snell or Aaron Nola, they don't have to give up draft pick compensation. So I think that kind of makes his market go up a little bit because teams are going to value that they don't have to give up a second round pick. So plays into things. We'll see. That's a great question, Dan. I think that's the ballpark we're looking at. Say a little bit higher years, and years. It'd be basically the years of Walker with the AAV of Bassett. So I guess 484, 100, something in that range for Jordan Montgomery. So Cardinals Nation 247. If you don't follow them on Twitter already, definitely follow them. They're awesome. Share articles all the time from a variety of different Cardinals outlets. And so just give them a good follow on Twitter, Cardinals 247. I think they have a Facebook group as well. And he asked, with Mosaic saying realistically they will be looking to add 3 starting pitchers for next season, and with the money coming off the books, what mix via free agency and trade do you expect to be not just targets, but strong candidates to actually land at the Cardinals? Great question. And I'm actually probably going to go more into this in a future episode. So I was kind of like, how much do I go into it here? Because you basically took a podcast episode idea and put it into a question. I'll give the framework at least. And then I think I'll go way more into it because I'm going to put the tiers, because this is what I already started to work through, is what are the tiers of players they can go for. But then I can kind of, in a future episode, I'll mix and match how this could work, because they're not going to sign. I don't think they'll sign tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. I don't think they'll trade for tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. I think if they sign a tier 1 starter, they're going to trade for a tier 2 starter. Or if they sign a tier 2 starter, they'll trade for the tier 1 starter, that kind of thing. Or there's just a lot of different mix and match. So I'll give you realistic targets in each tier. I'll kind of describe the tiers to you as well. And then in a future episode, I'll go through and talk about how could they actually approach it based on each strategy they could follow. Again, this is all subject to, we don't know how the market's going to play out, right? And so we just don't know how much Aaron Nola is actually going to ask for, how much it'll take to trade for Still Cease or all that. So this is kind of what I broke it down to. So I did 3 tiers of players that they could go after in the starting pitching market. So tier 1 is top of the rotation starter. That is a number 1. That is a guy that can start opening day, start game 1 of a playoff series, and you're like, that guy belongs there. It doesn't mean he's Justin Verlander of last year. It doesn't mean he's name your favorite ace starter from this year, right? But it does mean he's a guy that could start a game 1. And if the Cardinals get him, you're like, let's go. So free agency, I think there's 3 names I ruled out. Obviously, Ohtani's ruled out, and then Julio Urias. I just think the off the field stuff, I don't think the Cardinals will touch that. So 3 free agent targets: Aaron Nola, Blake Snell, and then Yamamoto. You all know. Like I said, bad names here. Interesting on Yamamoto. It seems people have cooled on him a little bit in the industry. Seems he's more of a number 3 starter right now. I still would put him in tier 1 because he's probably going to cost a lot because he's young. Probably has the upside of a number 2, maybe number 1. So he's probably going to cost a little bit. Aaron Nola, again, consistency. He gets you those innings. I've heard a really good comp of Miles Michaelis plus. So he's not like a strikeout guy. He's not a Cy Young guy anymore, but maybe he gets back to that. But he's like if you took Miles Michaelis and made him 20-30% better, that's like Aaron Nola. So that's a great guy to have as your 1-year rotation. I think he's probably the most realistic number 1 in free agency they could go after. And then Blake Snell is probably like my favorite of the group, but he's risky because, again, he's a guy who's had some really high highs. He's won the Cy Young. He's going to be in Cy Young contention again this year. And then he's had some low lows. He doesn't go deep in the games, struggles with walks. Man, he strikes guys out. So Blake Snell's interesting. Those are the free agents that I would say is a top of the rotation tier 1 type guy they could go for. And then on the trade market, I would say Dylan Cease, Tyler Glasnow, and maybe Logan Gilbert. Again, I think it depends on what the Mariners do in the offseason, and I don't think the Cardinals really want to trade their young bats like a lot of us thought they would, and I don't think the Mariners are going to trade any of their young starters. Dylan Cease, again, I think he's someone, obviously the White Sox last minute tried to trade him, didn't get what they wanted. He'll be 2 years away from free agency after this year, and so he's a guy that they'll probably want to capitalize on the value of. I think he'd be a great number one starter. Again, he's had a little bit of down year this year, but he's an interesting name. Tyler Glasnow, again, carries a ton of risk. He'll be on a $25 million in the last year of his contract next year, deals with a ton of injuries, but that guy has as much talent as any starter in all baseball. And I really do think the Rays are going to want to trade him this offseason. I know they just had a ton of starting pitching injuries, but like when you're a team that operates on a payroll they do, I don't think they can afford to pay him $25 million and run the risk of him getting injured. So I do think they'll try to trade him away, get pieces in return. They'll go sign another Zach Eflin type. They'll have some young guys come up. So I think Tyler Glasnow's a trade candidate. And I don't think it'll cost an arm and a leg to get him either because of those concerns. So I don't think Tyler O'Neill gets it done, but like something like Tyler O'Neill or Dylan Carlson plus more could be interesting. Maybe Brendan Donovan, but I think that's too much. Like, I think Tyler Glasnow won't get that much. But again, it probably depends on how competitive the market is. So, again, carries a lot of risk, but all these two guys do. Aaron Nola carries a ton of risk because you're paying a guy $30+ million a year for 5 years, hoping he stays good. So, same with Blake Snell. So, again, tier one, those are my tier one guys. Tier two is a number 2 or number 3 starter. Free agency, that's a Sonny Gray. I'll get more on him in the future. I like Sonny Gray a lot. Jordan Montgomery, Marcus Stroman, but feels really unlikely because the Cardinals didn't seem interested before. Eduardo Rodriguez, Lucas Giolito, and then Shota Imanaga, who we have a story on Redbird Rants about. He's a guy that the Cardinals went scouted in Japan late June. If he gets posted this year, he'll be less than a Yamamoto, but has strikeout stuff. He's 30 years old, a lefty. He's an interesting candidate. I think to say he's a number 2 is a stretch, but quality number 3, I think. And in the trade market, if you're looking for a number 2 starter, that's like a Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. Again, they're not number 2s, but like if the Cardinals trade for that kind of guy, it's going to cost like a lot. And so that's why I put them in tier 2, and they could grow into a number 2 starter. Edward Cabrera, Jesus Luzardo, and Braxton Garrett and Trevor Rogers from the Marlins. Again, number 2, number 3 type starters. Depends on who you ask. And then tier 3 is back of the rotation guys or guys looking to like on prove it deals where they're like, hey, I'll sign a 1-year deal with you and I could be a number 2 starter or I could be awful. Tier 3, so that's like a James Paxton, a Kenta Maeda, Frankie Montas, Luis Severino, and Michael Lorenzen, I think are guys that could be in that. Michael Lorenzen might be tier 2, but I would say tier 3. And then trade market would be a Jose Quintana. The Mets want to eat some money on that. Jeffrey Springs from the Rays, again, if they want to eat some money or just get rid of a deal. And then Clark Schmidt from the Yankees. So again, it's Cardinals 247. I'll get more into this in a future episode because I just have a lot of thoughts about a lot of these guys and how you can mix and match them. But I think those are kind of the tiers you're looking at. Those are names I think are realistic. They're not going to get all of them. So that's not the point here. And I could see him striking out a lot of them. But I think those are the types of names they'll look at. But we'll see what happens. So 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the episode here. So Thomas Gavin, again, Redbird Ranso, rep in there. Who will be next year's starting center fielder? If at Carlson and Edman are traded, the options aren't very promising. Do you see a team signing an outside free agent center fielder? Right now, I would bet a lot of money that Lars Nootbaar is the starting center fielder, especially with. I don't think the Cardinals trade both Dylan Carlson and Tommy Edman, so I think one of them is around still, and so they'll have flexibility to move one of those guys into center if they want to move Nootbaar to a corner. But my guess right now is an opening day outfield is one of Brendan Donovan or Alec Burleson in left, Nootbaar in center, Jordan Walker in right. No on Alec Burleson left. People get really mad about him being in left field and say, like, how can you have a defender like that out there? I believe he's at a -2 DRS this year, defensive runs saved, which again is not great, but he a little bit below league average defender right now, could be about league average. And then you have Jordan Walker, who's last I checked, -15 in defensive run saves in right field, which is the third worst among all outfielders in baseball. So if you're going to complain about the defense, Alec Burleson, I know a lot of you already complain about Jordan Walker's defense, and I think if you're like me, you believe he'll get better. We'll get more of that in it later. Alec Burleson's fine. Like, it's not great, but he's fine. So Brendan Donovan, Alec Burleson left, Lars Nootbaar is the team center fielder, and then you probably have Jordan Walker and right there. So I do think there's an outside chance they bring in a center fielder. Cody Bellinger, I think he's priced his way out of their market because they have to spend way too much in free agency on pitching. I don't see them going after him too. I could see a Harrison Bader reunion, and I could see a Kevin Kiermaier type guy. But I think that probably requires them trading a few of Alec Burleson or Tommy Edman or Dylan Carlson, Tyler O'Neill, those type of guys to clear some room. But I think they really like the idea of Nootbaar out there next year. So, and then again, I do think they keep one of Carlson, O'Neill, or Edman, or probably two of them, and that's their backup center fielders. So that's kind of where I have to see that situation. But I do think it's one to monitor because clearly they've been not committal to anyone in center field. So I think Victor Scott II by mid 2024 could be an option. That might be a little bit of projecting too much. But I think they see that too. So I don't think they're going to go after a long-term center field option when they think they can at least get through half of 2024 or all of 2024 with Nootbaar in center. So that's where I kind of see that. Last question from Brad Barr. I'll appreciate your support on Redbird Rants all the time, man. And just, appreciate the question here today too. He says, I'll preface this by saying that Goldie, even though he's amazing, should not be extended past 2024, period, with no ifs, ands, or buts. And so then he says, if that happens, so if he's not extended beyond 2024, which current young Cardinals position players would you put at first base for the 2025 Cardinals? So first, I'm going to shoot down your wish, Brad Barr. I do not see basically any scenario where Goldschmidt is not with the team past 2024, unless somehow they don't. I believe they'll reach an extension this offseason. Maybe they don't. And then maybe Goldschmidt has a bad year in St. Louis. Then maybe he doesn't come back. But even then, I feel like they'll probably work something out. So we'll see. Honestly, the way he's finished this year, he might be playing his contract lower right now. So like, I would have thought at least 2 years, 40 million for him this offseason, a couple months ago. Again, I'm not concerned. I think Goldschmidt will be fine next year. Do I think he's gonna be MVP Goldschmidt again? No. But do I think he'll be the Goldschmidt most of us love him? No, I do think so. And I thought he could potentially get up to 2 years, 50 million recently. But I would say we're probably looking at I don't know, 240, but we'll see. So Goldschmidt's staying, but in the event somehow Goldschmidt isn't there, I think Alec Burleson's probably the most logical fit there. I think Brendan Donovan's a sneaky fit there too because of his arm issues, but I think he'll be fine and they'll use him as a Swiss Army knife, but he could play there a decent amount. I'll just do things real quick. Jordan Walker doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why people say bring him to first base and that it's his natural position because I don't even know if he played in high school, but he hasn't logged a single inning in all of his professional life at first base. And first base isn't a position you can just throw someone at. I'm not saying Brad Barr is saying that, but like I think some people are like, oh, just put Jordan Walker at first base right now. And it's like he's not going to just be a decent first baseman right away. Like that takes time to develop. And so also Jordan Walker has the tools to be a good outfielder. And you're way more valuable as a player when you play any other position besides first base. That diminishes your value and it makes it harder positional flexibility for the future. Like then you don't have first base open for guys who are defensively deficient or a big bat for first base. So you want Jordan Walker to be a corner outfielder. So if 2024 goes terrible for him again, sure, then you maybe reconsider where his position is. But my guess is he becomes about a league average outfielder next year and continues to progress. And do I think he'll be an elite outfielder? No, but do I think he'll be an above average outfielder at some point? Probably. And that's way more valuable than a first baseman. Keep developing him there. And then I've seen people say that Nolan Gorman can move over there. Again, he's never played first base that I know of. And he's actually becoming really underrated as a defensive second baseman. He's about league average there now, and he's only played the position for a few seasons, and he's a great comp for what Jordan Walker can do. Last year, Nolan Gorman, terrible defensive second baseman. It was also basically just he was basically a year and a half into playing the position, a la Jordan Walker, basically a year and a half into playing the position. So give them some time. Some guys like Brendan Donovan, Tommy Edman, they can bounce around, they're fine. Other guys aren't like that. And so give Gorman some time. He's already an above average second baseman, or about average, the average second baseman. He could be even better than that. So again, Nolan Gorman is far more valuable as a second baseman hitting 40 home runs for your team than a first baseman. So obviously, if his defense is horrible, you make adjustments, but it's not. And so give them some time. Goldschmidt staying. That's about it, though, for this episode. Appreciate all the questions coming in. If you like this episode, let me know. Again, like and subscribe to the podcast. It helps a ton. If you can give a rating as well, that's really helpful. Leave some comments if you have any thoughts as well, or some thoughts on Twitter. Love to hear it, and I would love to bring back another Q&A episode in the future. Again, if that's something you guys are interested in, and we can bring those back here soon. But again, thanks for everyone who submitted questions. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Catch more of my written work over at Redbird Rants. We're putting out content pretty frequently on things. Appreciate all the support. We got some more episodes coming, and so stay subscribed, stay up to date with everything, and I'll catch you guys next time. So thanks for joining the Redbird Rundown.